Welcome to another session of the Art of Meditation Summit. I'm Dr. Ron Siegel, a clinical psychologist at Harvard Medical School in the USA, and I'll be your host for the session. Today, I have the great pleasure of interviewing somebody who has really moved forward our understanding of meditative practices in the West, Dr. Sylvia Boorstein. Welcome, Sylvia.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining the summit. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And first, I'd like to share a little bit about your background for people who might not be familiar with your work. So Dr. Sylvia Boorstein is a psychotherapist and the co-founding teacher of Spirit Rock Meditation Center. She has been teaching in the Vipassana or insight meditation tradition since 1985 and is the author of 5 books, including It's Easier Than You Think, The Buddhist Way to Happiness, Don't Just Do Something, Sit There, A Mindfulness Retreat, That's Funny, You Don't Look Buddhist, On Being a Faithful Jew, and A Passionate Buddhist. Pay attention for goodness sake. The Buddhist path of kindness and happiness is an inside job. Practicing for a joyful life. And I may have screwed up exactly where the colons and the semicolons were in some of the titles, so I apologize for that. And I think you can see from the titles that there's a bit of a sense of humor in her teaching, so I hope we'll get to explore that. And Sylvia is particularly interested in emphasizing all of daily life as a venue for practice that includes informed citizenship and spiritual practice. So we'll be investigating that together too. So you've obviously had extensive personal as well as professional involvement with mindfulness meditation. For people who might be curious, and I always like hearing people's origin stories, what brought you to the practice originally?
I thought sometime I should write a book called An Accidental Buddhist because it was in the 1970s, and all of a sudden people were talking about meditations, and Herbert Benson had written his book, and everybody was going to this or that workshop for a weekend and taking this initiation and that initiation. And I went to some of them. My husband was a much more avid spiritual seeker than I in an overt way. He was going to this and that and the other thing. And he was more philosophical as well. He would say, I want to understand life. And I said, not me. I just want to be able to stand it. And but in the meantime, I am congenial, and he'd say, try this, I'll try that. And I'd go here and I'd go there, and nothing bad happened. And I got initiated into this or that, and I didn't do them very assiduously. And then he went and had a couple of weeks with on an insight Vipassana retreat. And he came back and he said, you should do it, so this is it. And I did, and it is. So that's the whole story. I would not to say that I went there and immediately became illuminated. The path is long. I actually I feel bad about the title that said, It's Easier Than You Think, The Buddhist Way to Happiness. I want to have a second subtitle instead of that. It's easier than you think, and it's to understand it, what it's all about and what freedom would mean. And it's harder than you can imagine, actually, to train the mind to do that. So it's a little bit of an oversell, but I like the teachers and I like the teaching and I like being quiet. And that's why.
And it's interesting how both are true, right? That on the one hand, this is the simplest of endeavors and so straightforward and always available. We can have clarity in any moment, and yet trying to figure out how to live a life or finding a way to live a life that's consistent with what we may glimpse easily is quite a project.
When people say, what are you trying to do in your practice? What's it for? These days I'm saying I am trying to habituate my mind to a kind response.
Yeah.
That's the whole of it, to myself, and as maybe not especially, or maybe especially, kinder to myself. I do something, it doesn't work out, I feel bad. To be able to say, sweetheart, you screwed up. Try it next time, you'll do better. And everybody else as well.
Right, which is interesting. And I don't know if you have the same sense of this arc, but it seems to me that Vipassana or insight meditation as it was taught. I began doing sitting retreats in the mid 70s, and as it was taught back then, yeah, there was some discussion of loving kindness practice and the like, but it was mostly focused on clarity, seeing moment to moment what's happening, how the mind creates suffering for itself. And the idea was if you could see it clearly, you'd be able to let it go and break free. And yet, for me personally, as well as, and I'm a clinician also, I certainly see this in the people who I work with psychotherapeutically. It seems that finding a way to be kind to oneself is often a lot more important. Has that been your impression?
I think that that's maybe primarily because you have to calm down in order to be able to see that. I remember my teacher talking about it being that mindfulness is a combination of a certain amount of steadiness, a certain amount of concentration, and insight to see what's true. But you really need that certain amount of steadiness that comes from not being tied up with recriminations and self-judgments and other people's judgments. You need a certain amount of kindness in the mind. I notice it out in the field that I don't know how other people are saying, but I talk from the beginning about meeting the moment as a friend. You could, and I think we had a more kind of clinical approach. This is happening. This is happening. Fear is arising. Fear, fear. And it took a lot of time for people to realize that when fear is arising, that's something to notice as well. Not just like this is fear, this is fear, this is fear. As much as sweetheart, you're afraid. Take a breath.
Yeah, yeah.
Be all right. You'll be okay. And what if a friend were to come up to me and say I'm frightened? They'd say I don't hold them. I say, sweetheart, take a breath. You'll be all right. But we forget to do that to ourselves. So we meet the moment, and then we kind of consolidate the moment by saying, fear, fear. Wow, where's fear? I got in the wrong practice. And I think that loving kindness is actually built into it. Meet the moment with openness and investigation and all of that. But in order to be able to do it, you have to be able to have calmed yourself down to be able to, whoa, it'll be all
Well,
right.
well, and as humans, yes, we can calm down by, having a state of concentration where we're fully absorbed in the candle, but we're more likely going to be able to calm down in the midst of a day if it can be exactly as you're saying, it's okay, sweetheart, to find some way to just be nice to ourselves. And, when you're talking about too, I was thinking of, the Dalai Lama who says, my religion is kindness.
Exactly so. Exactly so. And I remember hearing that years and years ago. And I've been talking about the fact that if someone would have come to me 45 years ago, which is when I started, and said, you got to take up Vipassana meditation, it'll make you more kind. I would say, listen, that's not my problem.
Right.
I come from a kind family. I'm more or less a congenial person. My problem is not kindness. My problem is anxiety. And I'm frightened of so many things. And it was a time in my life, anyway, when I was 40 years old. I had four healthy teenagers, growing up children. I had a vocation that I loved. I was in a relationship. Everything, my health was good and youthful. And all of that was good. And I was becoming more and more anxious as I became aware more and more that my apparently grand slam of a life was very precarious.
Yeah.
And numbers of things happened, and you look around and you say, uh-oh, there is something anxiety provoking about it. What is it? I think it's called a moment of existential anxiety. That would be an elegant way to say that. But this can't last. And here came along my teachers, and they didn't say this practice is good for existential anxiety. They said this is going to mean the pure heart's release. And I didn't know what that meant, but I thought it sounded really good. And I like my teachers very much. And fortunately for me, I didn't have to go any place to find teachers. I am the first generation of homegrown Vipassana teachers altogether. I didn't need to travel and study as my friends, my teachers, Jack Cornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, who spent, as you know, that time in Burma and Thailand and in India, because they came back and taught it to me. So
Right. No, it was really a gift. They're bringing that back because I too didn't go abroad to encounter these teachings. They brought them here, which was very sweet. And this is an impossible question to answer, but I find it interesting to ponder it a little bit. Can you imagine what the trajectory of your life would have been like had you not found the practices?
I think about it somehow. I can't imagine. I remember some time ago thinking in my 60s, I thought, well, had I not found these practices, had he not said, you ought to check this out, I remember saying, I'd be retiring as I'd be retiring as the president of the Women's Guild of Congregation B'nai Jacob in Suffolk County or something. I would, I'd be doing something like that. But I didn't, because of the person that I had in this or that. This one, why don't you try that, and why don't you try that? And because of my background and my parents who said you can do anything you want, I tried, and I feel myself really blessed by having fallen into the practice, kind of as an accident, and not turning down any doors to going on and learning. Um, I would have had an all right life. I think I
Mhm.
probably would have been. I don't think I probably be feeling as good as I am now, but who knows? Maybe.
Mhm. And who knows, maybe you would have found a path at the temple. I was just interviewing a Hasidic rabbi the other day and about meditative practices, and they exist in that tradition as well. They're just often lost on Long Island, I'm afraid.
Well, here I am. I think it's when so much seems to be, if not for this, but when I'm teaching it, I say the Buddha said because of this, that, and that's a fundamental thing to understand. It's not my fault and it's not his fault. It's everything's fault. Distal
Yeah.
karma and distal karma, proximal karma, that's the name for it. But everything is so amazingly the result of everything else, always in motion and right now as well as you and I. Uh, that it's awesome, and it could have
Yeah.
been otherwise.
I was just talking to a client this morning about free will maybe being overrated in the way we think about things. Because yes, we have the subjective experience of making choices, but it's factors and forces, right? When you're reflecting on your life and what it would have been like had you not encountered these things. And when I make the same reflect, feels like nothing that I've done is actually about me doing it. It's about these factors and forces that prepared this organism with this mind to do what he did at this moment. But it all kind of makes sense given all the conditioning and the environment and the genes and the like.
Radical thought, isn't it? Robert Sapolsky just wrote that book called Determined, and the thesis of the book is that it's all determined.
Yeah.
Um, it's just all everything in motion back to the very beginning and in motion now
Yeah.
and in the future, and that free will is overrated. And it's gotten such a backlash from people. It's so offensive.
I know it. Well, I think it's because it diminishes our sense of me, and none of us like that. But it, but it's I mean, the Buddha talked about this when he talked about dependent origination. I think he was
Yeah.
saying, look, it's all these factors and forces come together to make us who we are in each moment. And I think this loops back into what you're saying about kindness, because when I screw up, And I really, yeah, well, of course I screwed up. Here's all the reasons. And this isn't an excuse for not taking responsibility, not apologizing, not doing restitution, not fixing it. But if we can notice that, yeah, well, that's what this organism we call Ron or Sylvia does under these circumstances,
Yeah.
it's lighter.
Yeah, yeah. I learned a great line from somebody, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago when I was teaching at Spirit Rock at the time. I still am now. But in the context of a discussion where we were saying about uh there was a class that met in person and weekly, so people knew each other. And anyway, that we were talking about what do you say when somebody meets you? You see somebody online in a supermarket, you recognize them from class or in a dentist waiting room, and you say, "Hi, how are you?" And they say, "Fine." You say, "Good, yeah, how are you?" "Fine." And that doesn't mean that everybody's life is great. It means everybody's life's got stuff, but they're managing. That means it's a secret clue that I'm in the mindfulness club or something.
Hmm.
Life is full of stuff, but I'm doing all right with it. And we were talking about that back and forth. What does it mean? I'm fine. I'm fine. And a woman named Gwen, to whom I am always grateful for this particular line and insight, said to me at the time, said to the whole class, she said, "I never say I'm fine." She said, "I always say I couldn't be better."
Mm.
And when you think about it, it's great because none of us could be. If I screw up some way, I
Yeah,
didn't purposely, I don't mean to.
right, right.
And if somebody else screws up, and if there are political figures that are, for some reason, shocking to me in their terribleness, I have to think that they can't be better either.
Yeah, no, no, that's a super important insight that, they're doing what, because at least in contemporary America, of the various people that we other, it's often people with different political beliefs and identifications. And it's really easy to objectify the bad other. And
Yeah.
yet, of course, they're doing what they're doing what their DNA plus environmental history has predisposed them to do, the same way we're doing what ours has predisposed us to do.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't uh, say what our opinions are and
Right, or try to stop them or send money or
try to
whatever,
stop
right?
them or vote, for sure, vote. But they couldn't be better. And that's really
Couldn't
amazing.
be better. That's great.
That could be better.
Yeah.
When I say it to a group, I say, Gwen said, "I couldn't be better." And there's like a half a second pause, and then everybody gets it. They laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's there's a lot there are a lot of meanings in that simple line.
Used to be a Midwest thing. How are you? Couldn't be better. All right.
You're right.
But we can't. That's like, whoa. Anyway,
No, thank you. Well, today's summit is focused in particular on Vipassana practice, and I wonder if you could, and that's been the tradition that you've mostly taught in, but I'm sure you've been exposed to others, as most of us in the sort of American Buddhist community have been. And I wonder if you could just talk about what you see as the particular merits of Vipassana practice.
well, as I encountered it and as I've been in it, what I've really prized about it from the very beginning, what was really attractive to me is that it didn't require anything unusual for me. I was a 41-year-old professional working mother in a working suburban mother. I didn't have any background, particularly in meditation or Eastern religions, and I didn't have to change who I am. I'm just me. I didn't have to change my clothing or my name. Not that I don't admire people who do, but it was easy for me to start in with it. And then when I got in and I began to listen to Dharma and I began to listen to the Four Noble Truths and that life is suffering. How did they used to say it? I have a different way now. They used to say life is suffering. Da, 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 da. Now I'm careful to say life comes with pain and difficulty. Is the first noble truth. The second noble truth is when we react rather than respond. When we react out of unclarity rather than respond out of clarity, we complicate the moment, and that's called suffering. And we could stop doing that was the third noble truth. And then, of course, so it was very easy. And that sounded, that it's uncomplicated. I understood what it meant. I couldn't begin to understand, well, wait a minute, what about this? What about that?
Right.
But it sounded right to me. So that made it easy, particularly the Vipassana, because it came in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and it didn't require a particular background. It happened that my three teachers um, have more or less my same background, East Coast, college educated, post-war, but mine also includes middle of the war because I was born in 1936. And I had the experience of having the news about what happened to uh, relatives. I saw relatives who survived the war and came through our house and then went up to Canada because they couldn't get into the United States. So I had that amount of prehistory to Jack and Joseph and Sharon, who are my teachers. But it was easy to enter into it. I liked hearing about the end of suffering. Didn't get it about the purification of the heart, but that had such a nice sound. I was really to go with that, I think. After a while, when I discovered that, like that, this after a while is after a while, and I discovered that by just sitting, it was a time when I really thought that you had a life and then you went on retreat or you sat at home. And I wasn't a very good sitter at home every morning, whatever, every evening. But it was my experience on retreat that as soon as my mind settled down, it began to have a spontaneous examination of conscious. Two things. First of all, it felt a little better and my nerves would relax. So I felt better. At the same time, I discovered that the first thing that I recalled as the mind is settling down was a kind of spontaneous moral inventory. I'd remember, oh, my aunt called the day before I went on retreat and I forgot to call her back. I feel bad about that.
Mm.
I'm not going to make a call on retreat, but I make a note. Soon enough, I discovered that in the not always and not in every sitting and not all day, but a little notepad full of I wish I hadn't done that and I wish I hadn't done that. And I didn't put everything together for 20 or 30 years. But I love the idea that it seemed to me that the mind had a spontaneous moral inventory machine built into it. I liked that made me feel good about being a human being. I also discovered from, again, coming on retreats and hearing and having my mind be captured by something or other that was irritating to me, something that had happened before or something that I knew about. And I really remember thinking, this is terrible. I'm trapped here just with my own mind. And when it gets quiet, and you don't have all these things to do, I was such a good um, meditation. We used to call those yogis. We don't call them now. We call them meditators or something. I was so good about that. I had instructions that said, don't read, don't write, don't. I did keep my little list of who I had to do. Don't read, don't write, keep custody of the eyes, don't look at anybody. I did that. And I realized that a thought would come in my mind and I'd be so unable to get rid of it. The story would tell itself and tell itself and tell itself. And then at some moment, my mind would switch into, it was usually something that somebody had done that was so awful. And I think, oh, why did I accidentally think that story? I don't want to think it again. And at one point, it would be somehow a switch in my mind where I'd realize that the person who had done that or said that or whatever, they couldn't do other. They couldn't do better. They couldn't do better. And then I felt bad for them. I felt a certain amount of compassion for them. Then I thought, why am I and compassion for me? That so much of my mind could get really filled with recriminations and sit here with my jaw clenched and my fingers clenched. And when you stop, when you give that up, it's just such a relief. And
Yeah.
that so that maybe that's the beginning understanding what's the sure heart's release. I began to think I'm not held hostage by whatever vagrant thought comes into my mind. Or that might be true. I thought about that. Oh, if that's true, then I'm on. I'm going to do this. This is very good. So that was a main reason. Then I began to have, as I learned Dharma and learned more about the mind. I love it that Joseph Goldstein, when he was asked, at least in those days, are you a Buddhist? He said, I'm a student of the mind. And I love that. I don't, I don't know what it means. Are you a Buddhist? What does it mean that you do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm a student of the mind. And when I began to understand about the hindrance energies that fill everybody's mind of either lust. I always tell that to a class, and I say that doesn't mean lust in that way. It means the desire for something. When someone tells me that Maestro is a great movie and it just opened, I think, oh, I want to go to that. That's not a bad lust. I do want to go to it. But if I'm on my way to somewhere and I pass a smell of pizza, and I look up and I say, oh, it's a very good pizza parlor and I'm hungry. And I could go in. I have enough mind about me to say, listen, I'm on my way to an appointment. I'll have something later. We get diverted by things that we want. We don't have to fall prey to that siren call. And then all of a sudden, if I happen to see a headline about who did what, my mind's on, look what they did. Anger being one of them, torpor being another one, sleepy, I just can't pay attention. The one that I identify the most with is restless, what's it called? Restless worrying or something. Um, like, uh-oh, my husband is not at this corner where we've made up to meet 5 minutes from now. Maybe something befell him. Somebody attacked. We're in a foreign city. He's an older man. He could have get pulled into an alley. Maybe he's dead. I have a kind of a mind that thinks that. It thinks catastrophic response. It's incredible to me, Ron, how much, it's incredible to me, Ron, how much uh, that quality of make up a nerve-wracking story is people have it. When I describe my mind under any kind of provocation, can think a catastrophic thought in a microsecond. I say, who here has that? Half the
Yeah.
class
Yeah.
has that. That's the worst, And I tell them that. And then I tell them, listen, I have that. And here I am, clearly, I'm teaching, I will sure myself, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, so for those people, because it's a bear to have that, it's so unpleasant and it doesn't make any sense. And people will tell you it doesn't make any sense to worry. You can't, doesn't do any good. Of course, I know that. And so does everybody else. So I say, here's the good news and the bad news. Well, I'll tell you the bad news first. Bad news is it doesn't go away. It's a cookie cutter in the mind. And it cuts up cookies out in a certain way. And it does, I can't suddenly become a tall woman because I'm not. But the other thing is you can learn to recognize it. So it doesn't happen immediately. When I'm in an airport and they say, attention, ladies and gentlemen, I think, the flight I'm waiting for has just crashed. I think that in the next microsecond. I think it now, even though I've told the story 10 times, 1,000 times, maybe. Attention, may I have your attention, ladies and gentlemen? And the next thing they always say is, please keep your attention on where your luggage is and don't let other people fool around with it or whatever it is that they say. But it always has to do with minding your luggage, always. but still, my mind said, "Oh, what bad news?" And it's about watch your luggage. And so now what happens is they say, "Ladies and gentlemen," and I think to myself, I feel, but I say to myself, "It's the luggage."
Mhm.
He's not here on the corner. He will be. If he's not, I'll worry about it then. And what it does is subverts the whole adrenaline or whatever it is that
Yeah.
fills it.
I also find it helpful in terms of the self-kindness you're talking about, just acknowledge the negativity bias in the mind and that it's highly adaptive for our ancestors to think the worst and to watch out for the worst because that was good for surviving and reproducing, and natural selection doesn't care about whether we're happy or not. It cares about, passing on our DNA. So of
Yeah.
course it's there and it's going to keep happening. And that's why everybody's hands go up when you ask the question. And we don't have to condemn ourselves for it because that's implicit in what you're saying, that it's really okay to
Yeah.
be nutty in this particular way.
That particular way. Joseph used to say, uh, this is not, this is terrible. Look what's going on. And the sky is blue. You
Yeah.
know, I have this particular cookie cutter, and the sky is blue.
Yeah.
And the fifth of those, just to be a
So, so you're underscoring one of the really important elements of Vipassana or insight practice, which is to really notice what's happening moment by moment in the mind in a really non-judgmental way, in a way in which it's possible to be curious
Mhm.
uh, about the nuttiness when it's unfolding. And you had suggested a question that I'm really curious your answer to, which is, so in doing this kind of practice, how do you know when the practice is working?
Well, when they say, "Ladies and gentlemen," and I say it's the cookie cutter, and I feel it in my body, it doesn't stop the neurology, but it doesn't run away with me. It
Yeah.
doesn't do anything with it. Um, it makes me a happier person, and and besides, not so exhausting. The worrying one is just so fatiguing to the mind. The other thing that noticing what the mind does. Um, The particular thing that I began to notice is how my mind feels when it's kind.
Mm.
When I maybe if I'm on a good day, I see suddenly a political figure on a headline, and I'm about to think, or if I can think to myself, he couldn't be other, alas.
Mm.
And I don't have the shot of whatever adrenaline. Or alas for me, or alas for us, that we all have to have that. But my heart responds to the moment with kindness. I haven't polluted it with any of those other things, and I've polluted my body too. I
Yeah.
tell people, they say, "How do you notice that you do it?" If I'm driving my car, and all of a sudden I notice that my hands are like this, gripping the steering wheel. I say, "Wait a minute, sweetheart, relax." It anticipates negativity. It anticipates the thought, too many people on this highway. Why do they all go at the same time? You can't get home. It anticipates the negative thoughts so that either I have them, but they're not, but I don't make a personality out of it. I don't live
Mhm.
mired in it. I think and just the end of that is I think it makes my own mind sweeter.
Mhm.
I had one of my mentors was a rabbi named Zalman Schachter.
Mm.
He used to say, the mind is like tofu. Whatever you marinate it is how it tastes. He said,
That's great.
don't marinate it in bitterness. So I think about that all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
it matters what you marinate your mind in. And since I have been thinking, I've been telling people what we're supposed to do, what the instructions for mindfulness is not just notice what's going on moment to moment and all the attendant feelings and emotions and sensations that come up of it. Notice that, and then think with clarity, with what the text called clarity of awareness. When you notice that, clarity of intention, because you notice that and you say, "What? Who can I help? What can I do? Because maybe hold the door of the bank for somebody or do something else for somebody. It's what's going on? How is it echoing in me? And how can I serve?
Yeah, so you've looped back a few times in our conversation so far to what we might call the ethical, or I think that's what you mean by intention, right? That, are we at least trying to live according to values that make sense to us? Could you say a little bit more about that? And I think particularly, we're both psychotherapists, and in the history of psychotherapy, at least in the West, starting with Freud, trying to free people from the constraints of Victorian culture that sort of denied being a mammal with sexual and aggressive interests. That he sort of stayed away from moralizing. Like let's not feed an overly punitive superego, I think was how it was seen. And yet you're talking about something really interesting and I think important, which is that. Part and parcel of the practice is how we orient toward each moment of our life. And I wonder if you could sort of say more about that and how it fits with the sort of psychotherapeutic concern about let's not be too moralizing here.
I think maybe over the whole, this is too broad to make that a sweeping statement about, but I think that over the course of the last almost 40 to 50 years that I've been involved, I think in the teaching, when my teachers started in the teaching in the 70s, it was a different, let's not talk about morals. It was a question authority, don't do what your parents did, don't feel constraints. That commandments was a bad word. That's not,
Yeah, hippies weren't really into commandments.
not into commandments. So it was really interesting to teach in those days how to say the commandments. And I often was surprised that at the beginning of a retreat, they said, we're going to take on these 5 precepts, commandments. And they seem like regular precepts of everyday life, don't hurt anybody. And what's more, don't hurt anybody in these specific ways. And keep your mind clear so that you don't hurt anybody and yourself by inference in these specific ways. But we didn't put a lot of emphasis on it. People, I think, were not interested in hearing that. And they said, we'll just take these precepts for 6 days or 8 days or whatever. And I thought, well, what? At the end of the time, we're going to say, just do anything you feel like. It's not reasonable. I think what I've grown into is realizing not only are they precepts for all the time, they make sense. Don't complicate yourself with remorse, despair about what you did. But they turn out, I think, to be the natural inclination of the heart. One of the things that I'm most happy to discover when I think back of it, that the first thing my mind did was it said, you made this mistake, fix it up. And I decided that my mind is like a pool sweep. It goes around in the pool in the backyard and encounters any debris that's fallen in overnight, and it sweeps them all up in the corner so you can get rid of it. And I thought that my sitting on retreats, we call the aunt and make it up with her and do this. And I loved that my mind wanted to make itself free of the discontent of having misacted and done something that could have caused pain. And I think it happens naturally in practice.
Yeah, and as you talk about it, it occurs to me there's a kind of reciprocal sort of relationship here that I remember our mutual friend Jack Cornfield used to say, well, it's hard to have a pleasant sitting after a day of raping, pillaging, and stealing, right? That when we don't follow some basic ethical principles, it does agitate the mind. It leaves it a mess. But by the same token, when our mind is clearer and our heart is more open, we don't really want to do those things. I mean, we may notice an impulse arising, but but we're not going to do those things. So it kind of works both ways, right? That as we get clearer, we are less tempted to do those things. And the less we do those things, the more structure and support we've got for getting clearer.
Exactly. And I remember that when you mentioned Jack, I thought of this has got to be at least 40 years ago. There was a meeting of the Association for Transpersonal Psychology, which I don't even think exists anymore, in somewhere in the South Bay. And one of the workshops was a workshop for psychotherapists, uh, taught by Jack Hornfield. And I remember being in that workshop. I knew Jack by that time. And say he's got a room full of psychotherapists. And he said, the first thing I do with a new client is I teach them the precepts. And I thought, this is fantastic. This isn't they don't tell me a commandment, don't this and that. We're just growing out of, but it could have been in the 90s, really. They don't have any restraints. He said, the first thing I do is I teach them the precepts. I don't remember if he said they'll make them feel good and they'll make you feel good, but they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
So I was curious about one more topic, and then perhaps to invite you to maybe lead us in a practice. From talking to you and just reading some of your book titles, it's clear you've got a sense of humor. And I wonder what your thought is about the role of humor in practice.
Well, I think what you said in the beginning, Ron, is the important thing. I think I inherited. It's like some people have a sweet tooth. Other people have an irony mind. They see what's funny. I've been telling people recently. No, this is an important story, so I'll tell it fast because we're running out of time. My mother died more than 60 years ago because I was 23 years old, and I was somewhere out on the West Coast with my husband and two young babies, and I flew to New York because the funeral was the next day, and I was with all of them, but I don't have any memory of that whole thing. But I have a memory of getting dressed to go to the funeral the next day, and in my mother's bedroom, former bedroom. Anyway, I'm in there with her younger sister, who is my aunt, now 20 years older than I. So we're getting dressed in modest clothing for a funeral, and I said, Miriam, I don't know if I should put on lipstick. Do people wear lipstick to a funeral? And she said, I don't know. She said, it's too bad Gladys isn't here. Gladys would know. Now, that's so funny because it is too bad that Gladys isn't here. It's too bad that Gladys is dead, not that you couldn't give us a cosmetic rule. And I started to laugh because it's ridiculously funny. And it's in the middle of getting dressed to go to my mother's funeral. And I was anguished about my mother having died. But in that moment, I thought to myself, I didn't even think, but I noted it. And I've been teaching recently, if something happens that you noted, hey, that just happened. What does that mean? That meant to me that in whatever happens in life, you could be going to your mother's funeral, God forbid, and suddenly laugh.
Yeah.
I didn't do it because my mind is ironic and it makes jokes and puns and all those things, which I inherited from my father. But the point I'm telling the story is a thing like that happens, and then you make a decision. I am a student of the mind, and I made a decision that I should remember that because in the middle of catastrophe, like now, is a very difficult time in the world. But you can still laugh if something's funny.
Yeah. Well, and there's a bit of joy, right? Even in the midst of the sadness or the fear or the anger that humor taps into.
Something is funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it has been a sheer delight to have a chance to talk with you and have you share your wisdom and experience with us. If people wanted to learn more about your work, where would you direct them?
Well, I do have a website, but I think that just says where I'm teaching, wherever. I am on Instagram. I don't send a lot of messages out, but I do from time to time. They look on Spirit Rock and they see when I'm teaching again.
Hmm. And I imagine if people wanted to read some of what you've written, just a quick Google search, they'd
Oh,
come across it.
it's all there. It's all there. Uh, my favorite, my favorite book is Pay Attention for Goodness Sake. I
Mm-hmm.
like the stories in there very well.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, a person called me to, a journalist called me and we had a conversation briefly. He was writing something. And he said, we talked for a little while. And then he said, what's the name of your most recent book? And I said, pay attention for goodness sake. And he took umbrage. So I learned at the time that I had to say the name of my latest book
Yeah,
is Pay Attention for Goodness Sake.
there you go. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and to talk together. It's been a delight.
It's a pleasure. It was for me as well.